global warming is, and this is his phrase, a crime against humanity. So what he is saying is that these greenies, these fascists, because I tell you, what it feels like here is nothing more than a Nuremberg rally with all the banners and the slogans and the mindless chanting of the Hitler Youth. That's what it feels like, just like being at a Nuremberg rally. What they're trying to do is they are indeed trying to depopulate the world, but not to do it in the most sensible way. If you want to stabilize the world's population, there is one way, and one way only, that actually works. And it also happens to be the morally right way to do it, which is you raise the standard of living of the very poorest people up to a reasonable standard of living. And the moment you do that, the rate at which their population grows tends towards stability. And the more prosperous you make them, the more stable their population becomes. And what's the quickest way to make poorer countries prosperous? Well, I'll tell you for free, it's not to take all the world's agricultural land out of growing food and grow biofuels instead. That is monstrous. What they should do instead is to use all the world's agricultural land for growing food for people that need it, and not for growing biofuels for clunkers that don't. And they should also allow and encourage third world countries to use all the fossil fuels they want to generate electricity, because electricity is the fastest way out of poverty, towards population stability, and ultimately towards a smaller environmental footprint of mankind of every sort, not just CO2, because the so-called CO2 footprint of mankind is, as we now know from the latest science, absolutely harmless.
This global depopulation, though, rather than just a stabilization, which you speak of, this is a little different. This is designed more to kill off large pools of humanity, wouldn't you say?
There's a real danger that if the policies being pursued by the Nuremberg rally fascists here in Copenhagen are continued, then there will be even greater mass starvation than there already is. When I went to the conference centre today, I was surrounded by keening zombies in orange and green shirts, howling at me because they had burst into a meeting that I was last night at a Copenhagen hotel and had tried to break up the meeting by repetitive, robotic chanting of fascist slogans. And they surrounded me again today and began the same process. And they said they were really annoyed with me because I had given an interview to German television saying that these people reminded me of the Hitler Youth. They were jack-trainered rather than jack-booted, but that's what they were, the Hitler Youth. And they were quite angry about this. And I said, well, look, I'm sorry, but if you go around singing mindless slogans that you've been indoctrinated with, and you break up public meetings where we just wanted to have a quiet and orderly discussion, and you break that up, that is what the Hitler Youth used to do.
Sure.
And if you act like the Hitler Youth, I'm going to call you Hitler Youth. And if you ever do that to me or anyone I hear of again, I'll call it to you again. And that will get publicity around the world, but I will be able to justify what I'm saying. And so in the end, I think they really began to get the point that the right of free speech is a two-way street. It isn't just for them, it's also for us. And that's one of the things that's most striking about actually being at this conference in Copenhagen. It is the venomous, poisonous intolerance that is prevalent among the environmental groups here. Greenpeace, which now has a fleet of ships considerably larger than the British Navy, goodness knows who's paying for it. Maybe it's the Chinese, I don't know, but it's certainly not the private wealth of individuals sending their dollars to Greenpeace. But they've got an enormous vessel parked in Copenhagen harbour with slogans all over it. There are in every street here, in every major public place, there are displays of the crudest and most childish propaganda. There's even been a film shown at the beginning of the conference. The opening film that was shown was children standing in water that was gradually reaching their necks and saying, please save the planet before we all drown. I mean, this is the kind of thing that Joseph Goebbels would have been proud of. It's this kind of rank, extremist, fascist propaganda.
But also, Lord Monckton, the bigger the lie, the more likely people are to believe.
Well, that, of course, was Goebbels' great slogan. And that's, I mean, he would have been proud to think of a lie as big as this one, that adding, 1/2,000th part of the atmosphere of CO2 over the next 100 years is somehow going to set the planet on fire unless we save the planet, and it's going to cause sea level to rise, all the other exotic plagues and disasters worthier of the psalmist at his highest, or the St. John the Divine at his most excitable, than of any scientific document. These people are unbelievably extreme, unbelievably intolerant of alternative points of view. And one of them came up to me today, and she said, the thing is, you just are being paid by the fossil fuel industry, aren't you? So I said, my address is Harry, Rannoch, Scotland, and I gave the postcode. And I said, if Mr. Tillerson at ExxonMobil, you are listening, that's my address. Please send my fact check there, because I haven't had one yet. And I said, why don't we just talk about the science a bit? And of course, they can't do that because they don't know any science, and because they also haven't been classically trained. They fall back on the kind of mindless propaganda that the left always fall back on because they don't know anything about anything, really. And she started saying, but you must agree that there is a consensus among scientists. And I said, no, I don't agree that there's a consensus among scientists. Even if there were, science isn't done by consensus. And anyone who suggests it is perpetrating the ancient Aristotelian fallacy of logic known as the argumentum and populum. That's the head count argument. And then she said, but what about the Royal Society and the IPCC and all these bodies who say that it's all terrible? I said, that is the argumentum ad verecundiam, the argument from reputation. It's another logical fallacy. Just because somebody has an august reputation doesn't mean they're telling you the truth. They may have a very big financial vested interest, as of course the UN Climate Change Organization and the Royal Society and all these other scientific organizations. They're all making fortunes out of this scam. So of course they're going to say it's real, whether it's real or not. And so all these illogicalities, combined with absolutely zero knowledge of any of the elementary science, makes for a very easily manipulated population of young people all over the world today. Combine that with teachers desperate to get their children interested in something, with academics who will exclude from tenure and hound out of office anyone who doesn't believe the global warming nonsense, and politicians who find it attractive to try to attract the youth vote and to pick up an issue of saving the planet. It makes them sound so much grander than what they normally do. And the media who will always find a scare bigger and better than the truth, which is that the climate continues to be changeable much as it always has. That's a very heady mixture, a very powerful mixture of vested interests, all of whose interests coincide in manufacturing and peddling this scare. So you have your core of bad scientists, and those are the ones who are named in the emails of the ClimateGate scam. And then you have surrounding them all these very powerful vested interests who find it financially and politically profitable and expedient to go along with this nonsense, whether or not it's true. They don't actually care whether it's true, but it is useful to them. And that's what we're faced with. And it's very, very difficult to deal with, because in a situation like that, where you're faced with vested interests who are going to be vastly poorer than they are now, when this scam that is now enriching them stops, they will fight tooth and nail to prevent the truth coming through. And they will not engage in any rational discussion or debate, which is why Al Gore has continuously failed for nearly 3 years now to accept my challenge to him to debate this for a couple of hours, do it properly, on international television worldwide. He says he wants to raise the profile of the issue, but the one person he won't debate with is me. And when I was invited by the ranking minority member of the House Energy and Commerce Committee to appear in front of Congress in the summer to answer testimony given by Gore of the usual litany of imagined and entirely imaginary disasters that he always comes out with, the moment Gore heard I was coming, he begged the Democrat chairman of the committee to refuse me the right to testify. And it's the first time in the history of Congress that the ranking minority member, elected minority member of a committee of the House, has been refused his absolute right to choose whoever he wants to be a witness to appear in front of the committee. Freedom of speech under, I think it's the First Amendment, isn't it, of your Constitution, is now being taken away even in Congress itself.
That's correct.
By this essentially fascist administration. I'm sorry to have to use these labels, but really after 2 or 3 days of listening to these mindless chants of these people in T-shirts rushing around, accompanied each by a coterie of sleeves, and yelling essentially Nazi slogans, and with all the insensitivity and intolerance of the Nazis themselves, one has to say this is a Nuremberg rally. It is not a scientific conference. It's not a political conference. It is simply just a sort of Hitler Youth celebration. And it's a very, very uneasy and eerie experience, because I had not